I don't come from powwow people, being Apache. I've been around powwow since I was early on in like junior high, and to my knowledge from back then, and since I have been adopted both by Southern Plains and Northern Plains people who do powwow, the powwow basically is a gathering of people, Indian people, who come together to celebrate life. Traditionally, as I understand, both North and South, it was a tribal powwow. It was a tribal gathering. Other tribes would be invited, or members of other tribes would be invited, but it was not really an intergeneration, excuse me, would not be an intertribal powwow. It would be a tribal powwow. Because of the coming of the Eurocentric people, and this is more the British who became the Americans, and what happened in the establishment of reservations, boarding schools, etc., then more intermarriage between tribal people began to take place. And also in the case of Oklahoma, where there are probably 4 or 5 tribes that originated there, more or less, there are now 39 federally recognized tribes. So some of them were enemies, some of them didn't get along. They vied for the hunting lands back east. But now that they have been forced onto Oklahoma, there has been a lot more intermarriage, so they have become more intertribal in the last, say, 100 years. But it started with the boarding school system, where our children from different tribes were sent from different parts of the country to Oklahoma, to Carlisle, to California, to Arizona, up north to Denver, into the Dakotas, back northwest, into Seattle, Oregon, so that you had 10, 15, 20, maybe 30 different tribes represented at a small boarding school, starting with first grade. And we were not allowed to speak our language. We were not allowed to wear our traditional clothing. We were not allowed to have our long hair. So we were forced to begin to communicate and establish a network of friendship that maybe originally we would not traditionally have had, or may never have come about in our lifetime. But because of being thrown into boarding schools, all of a sudden it was we and they, or us and them, they, them representing the U.S. government, the military, the Indian agent, and certainly the religious boarding school types. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong, good or bad, but that's a reality that we were tossed into. The we or the us is the fact that we were indigenous children. We looked more like each other, we lived like each other, and we were dealing with the same forces of outside influence, I was going to say evil, that were forced on us. And therefore, we began to form friendships and alliances that we would not have formed maybe ever, and certainly not as little people, first grade through 12th grade. So that was the beginning for me, and in my way of thinking and speaking with people over the years from other tribes, of what began to strengthen us in many ways as a group of indigenous people in the U.S., and I'm sure in Canada in some ways. And therefore, when the powwow which was more of a tribal occasion or a tribal festivity, took on that different meaning of intertribal, and a lot of it came about because we became friends with members of other tribes, and we stayed in touch. World War I further strengthened that amongst the men and our tribal people. A lot of our tribal men went to war for the U.S. There were some who were code talkers. In the European theater at that time, the same thing happened in World War II, where there were even more Native men, more Indian men who served, especially in the Pacific theater, the Navajo code talkers being the best known now. When it occurred, nobody knew about them. So when our men came back from war in World War I and World War II, there was this bond that had been cemented by war that occurred, and that further strengthened the friendships, the camaraderie, the reliance on each other as Indigenous people. I will make reference to World War II. When the veterans from World War II came back, that's when the National Congress of American Indians and the National Tribal Chairmen's Association was established, based around issues of commonality. Because we all had land that we had to defend, we had water rights we had to defend, we had mineral rights we had to defend, fishing rights, hunting rights, etc. And those two organizations were formed. The National Tribal Chairmen's Association no longer exists. I had the honor and privilege as a young Fed to attend both of those organizations early on in my professional career. That's also when men and women formed some of the other national organizations that still exist, like the National Indian Education Association, the National Indian Scouting Association. So those are some of the things that that have brought us together now to the powwow on an intertribal basis, and it has become much more of a social gathering rather than a ceremonial gathering, although many of the dancers and their families, in their own way, in their hotel rooms or their homes or where they camp, do ceremonies prior to, during, and certainly after dancing.